Hi, I'm Claude,
And I'm Edzo, and you're listening to FamTalks.
where we talk about faith, apologetics, and ministry. And note that we're not experts on this, but as a family, we want to encourage other families to talk about big questions on faith through apologetics and maybe eventually ministry.
Yes, that's right. And today we're going to be tackling one such question. And that question is, what is the purpose of man?
Yes, I think that's an important question, my son. Otherwise, if you don't think about these things, you'll go through the motion of
Mhm.
life, meaninless,
Yeah.
right? Without a purpose. So before we unpack the purpose of man, I think it's good to understand what purpose is not,
Yeah,
right?
I think that's a very good place to start, Mom, because as you said a while ago, we'll just be going through the motions of life. And if we follow the wrong purposes, like a lot of people, we would find that life would be meaningless. Because when we look for the purpose of life, it is inexplicably, it's very much tied to the meaning of life that one
Mm,
person holds for themselves. And rather than what really purpose is not, because purpose is not a lot of things, I think it's easier
mm,
to answer what is the wrong source of one's purpose,
mm.
right? And usually a lot of people would say that they would find their own purpose in life, right? That they would be the ones to determine their own purpose, their own worth. But the
Mm,
problem with that is that you can't make a purpose greater than yourself.
right.
You will never be able to create something better than yourself. So you are limited by yourself. And I'm sure that every person would feel like that's wrong. That's not
Mm,
enough. Because when you want a purpose, you want something grand, you want something greater than yourself.
right.
So then, would the purpose be to look to the universe, look outward, perhaps through a
Mm,
family?
mhm,
Perhaps you wouldn't find your purpose by building a family. Perhaps you
mhm,
would find a purpose by giving to charity,
mhm,
right? All of those sounds like good things, Mom. But the
right.
problem with these things is that, again, in the grand scheme of things, that in the infinite time of the universe, it would again feel meaningless
Mm,
because after 100 years, 1,000 years, all of these things would have been forgotten.
right.
You would have been forgotten.
Mm,
That's why these sources of purpose seem meaningless because at the end of time, or as time flows,
mm,
nobody, or it seems like the universe would eventually forget about you.
right. And I think that's an important point because from what you said, purpose is not, if I could say that in the simplest terms, that based on what you said, is not looking at the things that you're producing. For example, building a family, giving to charity. It's a self dictated purpose or giving meaning to life,
Mhm.
right? And if it's self dictated purpose, I think a question that I was thinking along those lines is that, for example, right now I'm holding my cell phone, my son.
Mm.
The cell phone in itself cannot dictate its purpose. The creator of the cell phone dictate the purpose of the cell phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the purpose of cell phone is for communication, for possibly doing music, all of these things, right? If I use this cell phone to like a hammer to hammer a nail, then it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't fulfill its purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, purpose is actually dictated by the creator.
Yeah.
It's not looking inward in terms of the purpose of man.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And I think from our previous discussion, we were able to establish the point that God exists. He
Mm-hmm.
is the creator.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the point that we believe the Bible with its highest authority. We believe that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and everything in it, and man included,
Yeah.
right? So, with that in mind, what are you thinking, my son, in terms of the purpose of man? Where should we look for the purpose of man?
I think there's only one answer to that, mom, and that purpose could for man could only come from God.
Hmm.
Right? I think I was able to say why it can't come from ourselves, why it can't come
Mm,
from the universe, because it's not the universe that created us.
right.
It's not even our parents who created us.
Mm,
They're not the ones who give us our purpose, but it is God,
definitely. Right.
right? It
I
is
love that.
God who shaped us, molded us, and has planned
Amen.
for us everything in our path.
Right. It's good that you mentioned that because even if you came from me, you know, with all the decisions that you had in life, right? We would always ask, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
Because we also know that God would lead you, that there are certain decision points that we cannot really make for you. And we ask you that even as young as you were when you were in 5 years old, like going to the toy store, what do you like? Maybe those little things would also continue to move you towards the purpose of God for you. What are the
Mm.
toys you like, right? It's interesting. You love Lego at that time, and now you're into coding, all of these little details. But right, I think we want to establish that purpose comes from the creator. And if the creator is God, then we look back again to his word. And what an amazing thing to look back at Genesis,
Yeah, definitely.
right? And in Genesis 1, allow me to read that for you, my son, because I know um there's just so many things to unpack here, right? So Genesis 1, 26 to 28. I'm reading from NIV. And let me know your thoughts about this verse. It says that then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground.
Wow.
Powerful, right? What do you think about it, my son?
I think let's just go back to the start wherein it said that God said, let us make man in our image, right?
Mm,
In our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, right? I just want to focus that God had made each and every one of us in his image, which is something that we talked about just last week about
mm,
how what is man? That man is created in God's image.
right.
And so I believe that the purpose of man is also closely tied to that. That since we are made in the image of God, the way that we act, the way that we interact with other people should also show that. It
Mm,
should also be reflecting that we are children of God. We are
mm,
not children of this world. We are
mm.
not bound by this world,
Love that.
right? But we should be people who represent God.
I love that. So, in a sense, if we're going to summarize everything you said, it's really to reflect God's image.
Mm-hmm.
When he said, let us make mankind, that's what you emphasized in our image. It means that we are reflecting God's image.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in one of our conversations in our previous podcast, we we talk about what is man having the attributes of God
Yeah.
because we reflect who God is. When if He created us in His own image, we are to reflect His image.
Mm-hmm.
But as we reflect His image, it doesn't end there, my son, right? It doesn't end there because it says here in verse 28, be fruitful and increase in number. fill the earth and subdue it. What I'm thinking along these lines is that as we become fruitful, we actually reproduce God's image,
Mm.
right? So, in the context of family, I love the part that as parents reflect God's image, that is also being translated in the way they disciple their children.
Mm.
It's reproducing God's image. I think as as God's steward, as a parent, we have that accountability.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, like reproducing God's image, there is also another point here, my son, that says after that, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creatures that moves on the ground.
Mm.
I love that because with reproducing God's image, we are to rule over all this creation. God expects us to be good stewards,
Yeah.
right? With
Definitely.
rule, authority comes, therefore, we are to be good stewards.
Mm-hmm.
So, from this passage alone, gives us a very good 3 points to actually remember the purpose of man if we're going to look at the creator.
Mm.
And from our discussion, that would be my son.
I think those three could be summarized in also three R's.
Wow. Okay.
The first would have to be to sorry,
Reflect.
to reflect. Yeah. So we need to reflect God's image. The second is to reproduce God's image.
Mm-hmm.
And the third is to rule, right?
Right.
To rule over the
All
whole
creation.
creation. Yeah, that's right.
I love that. So, um, God creating us in his own image and us coming from the creator, he was the one who had given us the purpose.
Mhm.
So sometimes people would go through life with finding meaning to life in the things they do or everything around them. My question there would be, have they ever really considered looking up? Because they're just looking down around them, like, or beside them, or like just around them. Have they considered it? Just looking up, the vastness of sky, the beauty of clouds, you know how much I adore that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
You can't deny God's existence. So looking up to God, acknowledging that he is there and he cares about everything. I know God would be happy to reveal his purpose to us through a personal relation, and that's another R, through a personal relationship with God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Clearly, without a personal relationship with God, we won't know God's divine purpose for our lives, right?
Yeah, so I guess all these three R's that we are to reflect, to reproduce, and to rule, it all boils down to one, which starts with a relationship with God.
Amen.
And I
Yeah.
think that it's important to remind also to our listeners that the way this relationship grows, it's something that needs to be nurtured. It's
Hmm.
something that you actively take part in so that this relationship actually grows.
Right.
Because if you don't do anything, how do you expect that relationship to become fruitful?
Right.
Right. So to
Hmm.
be able to have this relationship with God, it's important that we are first and foremost actively seeking Him by reading our Bible and also through prayer,
Amen.
right? So by praying to God and by reading His Word, we're able to have that conversation with Him, like how we're having a conversation now. That
Amen.
through this, we are able to show, right? That we are able to show God that we are listening, we are hearing Him, and that we want to nurture our relationship with Him.
Amen to that, my son. I think that's so rich in terms of having that personal relationship with the Lord. And it also starts with a humble heart.
Yeah.
So that's our challenge for all of you, our dear listeners. Look up to the Creator to know the purpose that you have. But at the same time, if you don't have that personal relationship with him, start acknowledging that God exists, that he is there, he's looking after you, and surrender your life to him. And I know that God would just be waiting for you to take that step as well, because he had already revealed himself to us in one way or another.
Yeah.
So with that, my son, I think we can wrap up our conversation from this. And I enjoyed our time together. So I hope you also enjoyed our conversation this today. You know? We don't want to say what time is it. But thank you for listening.
Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit that bell so that you are notified for whenever we upload next.
So bye for now.
Thank you for listening.